Guys, we're gonna go ahead and get started with class now. So we have Marlissa doing a story time, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Adult story time, not kids time, whatever.
Hi, you guys. So
Hi.
read Charlotte's Web.
Huh?
Has anybody seen the movie before I start reading it?
Yeah, I
Yes.
do.
Animated movie.
I don't know, just
I've seen the cartoon movie.
I don't watch that.
Chapter 1, Before Breakfast. Where's Papa going with the axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Out to the doghouse, replied Mrs. Arble. Some people were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe, continued Fern, who was only 8. Well, said her mother, one of the pigs is a rat. It is very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father decided to do away with it. Do away with it, shrieked Fern. You mean kill it just because it's smaller than the others? Mrs. Arble put a pitcher of cream on the table. Don't yell, Fern, she said. Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway. Fern pushed her out the way and ran outdoors. Her grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were stopping by the time she caught up with her. Papa, don't kill it, she added. It's unfair. Mr. Arble stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you will have to control yourself. Control myself, said Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself? Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Fern, her, Mr. Arble, I know more about raising litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig help be born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arble smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing, a little runty pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern. Still hanging on to the axe, this is the most terrible case of injustice I've ever heard of. A crying look came over John Arble's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house and I will bring the rent when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby. Then you will see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arble returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a cart under his arm. Fern was upstairs, changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wet smoke from the stove. Put it on your chair, she said Mrs. Arble. Mr. Arble set the cart down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the rolled towel. Fern came slowly down. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the cart wobbled and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There inside, looking up at her, there was a newborn pig. It was white one. The morning light shone through the ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arble. Saved from an untimely death, and may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered, oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed her carton carefully. She kissed her father, then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifting the pig out and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest for breakfast, said Mrs. Arble. Wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You'll call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in a half hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Said Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. April. Fern was up at daylight trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows that if a person gets out of bed properly, let's eat. But Fern can eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arble found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple, but she poured warm milk into the bottle, visited the nipple over the top, and handed it to her. Fern, give him this for breakfast, she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pigs, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from this road. Run, commented Mr. Arble, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and turned out of the window.
Marlissa, I think you might be muted.
Yeah, so like,
Can you guys hear Marlissa?
No.
No.
Wilbur. She whispered to herself. She is still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania? Wilbur, replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled and Fern blushed. Chapter 2, Wilbur. Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his mouth, tied his bib on, and held his bottle for him. Every afternoon, when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for him. She fed him again at supper time, and just before going to bed. Mrs. Arble gave him a feeding around noontime each day when Fern was away in school. Wilbur loved his milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her while adoring eyes. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove in the kitchen. Then when Mrs. Albers complained, he was moved to a bigger box in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Albers fixed a small yard especially for Wilbur under an apple tree and gave him a large wooden box full of straw, with a doorway cut into it so he could walk in and out of if he pleased. Won't he be colder at night? Said Fern. No, said her father. You watch and see what he does. Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree inside the yard. Wilbur ran to her and she held the bottle for him while he sucked. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleeplessly in the box. Fern purred through the door. Wilbur was poking the straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel in the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered with straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her in mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and would stay warm. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road where Fern had waited with her still the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around the turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up inside his yard. But as soon as he got home in the afternoon, she would take him out and he would follow her around the place. If she went into the house, Wilbur would too. If she Upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom step until she came down. He liked this. And if he was very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep under the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed and his lashes were so long. The doll would close her eyes too, and Fern would wheel the chair very slowly and smoothly so not to wake her infants. On warm afternoons, Fern and Avery put on a bathrobe, bathing suits, and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she rounded into the brook, Wilbur waded in with her. She found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook, where it was warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was happy day and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers call a spring pig, which simply means that he was born in springtime. When was 5 weeks old, Mr. Albert said he was now big enough to sell and would have to be sold. Fern broke down and wept, but her father was firm about it. Wilbur appreciated and had increased. He was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Albert was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. He's got to go, Fern, he said. You have had your fun raising a baby pig, but Wilbur's not a baby anymore, and he has to be sold. Call up Mr. Zuckerman's, suggested Mrs. Abers to Fern. Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes there to live, you can walk down the road and visit him, and as often as you like. How much money should I ask for him? Fern wanted to know. Well, said her father, he's a runt. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig, you'll sell it for $6 and see what he says. It was so arranged. Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith, and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer, and Uncle Homer came from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard that the price was only $6, he said he would buy the pig. Next day, Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree and into the live in the manure pile in the cellar of Zuckerman's barn. Chapter 3, The Escape. The barn was very large. It was very cold. It smelled of hay and it smelled of manure. It smelled of persimmons of tired horses and the wonderful sweet breath of patient cows. It often had a sort of a peaceful smell, as though nothing bad could happen even again in the world. It smelled of grain and of harnesses dressing and of axle grease and the rubber boots of a new rope. And whether the cat had given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell of fish. But mostly it smelled of hay, for there was always hay in the great loft up overhead. And there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and the horses and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in winter when the animals spent most of their times indoors, and it was pleasantly cool in the summer when the pig door stood wide open to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups on the main floor for the cows, a sheepfold down below for the sheep, a pig pen down below for Wilbur, and it was full of sorts of things that you would find in barns. Ladders.
Marlissa?
Yeah.
Is it okay I get off?
Yeah, that's right, Cliff.
I like the book and I've seen the movie, but I prefer to read the book myself. And when I listen to a book, it bores me. There's nothing against you. I get bored with what?
It's okay.
I prefer reading the book myself.
Okay.
I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye, Cliff.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
And pitchforks, monkey wrenches, straws, lawn mowers, snow shovels, axe handles, and milk pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows like to build their nest in. It was the kind of barn that children like to play in. And the whole thing was owned by Vern's uncle, Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that a manure pile is a good place to keep a young pig. Pigs need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable. Down there in the barn cellar on the south side, Fern came almost every day to visit him. She found an old milking stool that had been discarded, and she placed the stool in the sheep fold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese who lived in the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out and did not allow her to get into the pig pen. But he told Fern that she
She froze again.
Oh, okay.
Wilbur was happy to know that she was sitting there right outside his pen. But he never had any fun, no walks, no rides, no swims. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered onto his small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. There's nothing more to do around here, he thought. He walked slowly to his food and sniffed to see if anything had been overlooked and at lunch. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. Then he tried of this. When he tired of this, he walked indoors, climbed to the top of the manure pile, and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired of standing still, tired of laying down. I'm less than 2 months old and I'm tired of living, he said. He walked out to the yard again. When I'm out here, he said, there's no place to go but in. When I'm out indoors, there's no place to go but in the yard. That's when you're young. Okay, that's where you're wrong, my friend, said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence and saw the goose standing there. You don't have to stand in the dirty little yard, said the goose, who talked rather fast. One of the boards is loose. Push on it, push on it, and come on out. What? Said Wilbur. Say it slower. At the risk of repeating myself, said the goose, I suggest that you come in on out. It's a wonderful out there. Yes, what? Did you say the board was loose? That I did, and I did, he said the goose. Wilbur looked and up to the fence and saw that the goose was right. One board, one loose. But his head down, shut his eyes and pushed. The board gave away. In a minute, he had squeezed through the fence and was standing in the long grass outside his yard. The goose chuckled. How does this feel to be free? She asked. I like it, said Wilbur. That is, I guess I like it. Actually, Wilbur felt a quarter to the outside the fence with nothing between him and the big world. What do you think I'd better go? Anywhere you like, said the goose. Go down through the orchard, root up the sod. Go down through the garden, dig up the radishes, root up everything. Eat grass, look for corn, look for oats, run all over, skip and dance, jump and prance. Go down through the orchard and stroll in the woods. The world's a wonderful place when you're young. I could see that, replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, stopped, looked all around, sniffed the smells of the afternoon, and then set off walking down through the orchard. Pausing in the shade of an apple tree, he put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window and she immediately shouted for the men. Homer, she cried, pigs out, Homer, pigs out. He's down there under the apple tree. Now there's trouble, thought Wilbur. Now I'll catch it. The goose turned the racket and she started hollering, run downhill. Make for the woods, she shouted to Wilbur. They'll never catch you in the woods. The cocker spaniel heard the commotion and he ran out from the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard and he came out of the machine shed where he was needing a tool. The hired man heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everybody walked toward Wilbur and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a very long way, and anyway, he had never been down there in the woods and wasn't sure he would like it. Get around behind him, said Mr. Zuckerman, and drive him toward the barn. And take it easy. Don't rush him. I'll go and get a bucket of slop. The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly along the animals on the place. Whenever any creatures broke loose of Zuckerman's farm, the event was a great interest to the others. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lambs learned about it from their mothers. The horses in the stalls in the barn pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollering. And soon the horses had caught up on what was happening. Wilbur's out, they said. Every animal stirred and lifted its head and began excited to know that one of the friends had got free and was no longer pinned up or tied fast. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to go run. It seemed as though if everybody was after him, if this is what it's like to be free, he thought. I believe I'd rather be pinned up in my own yard. The cocker spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. The hired man was sneaking up on him from the other side. Mr. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he needed started for the garden. And now, Mr. Zuckerman was coming down toward him carrying a pail. This is really awful, thought Wilbur. Why doesn't Fern come? He began to cry. The goose took command and began to give orders. Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge out, cried the goose. Skip around, run toward me. Skip in, out, make for the woods, twist and turn. The cocker spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran, reached out and grabbed Mr. Zuckerman, screamed. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between legs. Wilbur was grabbed and then Wilbur had grabbed the spinal instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run downhill, suggested the cows. Run towards me, yelled the gander. Run uphill, cried the sheep. Turn and twist, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Look out, called the cows. Look out for Mr. Zuckerman, yelled the gander. Watch out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, screamed the goose. Poor Wilbur. was dazed and frightened by his huckleberry, who didn't look being the corner of his fuss. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him, but he couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time, and he couldn't turn and twist when he was jumping and dancing. And he was crying so hard he couldn't barely see anything that was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern was there to take him in her arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pail of warm sops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's cornflakes, and a powerful lift from Mr. Zuckerman's breakfast. Come, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. Come, pig. Wilbur took a step towards the pail. No, 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 said the goose. It's the old pail trick. Wilbur, don't fall for it. It doesn't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into the captivity. He's appealing to your stomach. Wilbur didn't care. The food was smelling appetizing. He took another step toward the bucket.
Hello.
Pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began flying slowly towards the barnyard, looking all about his innocence as if he didn't know that a little white pig was following along behind him. You'll be sorry, called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking towards the pail of slop. You'll miss your freedom, honked the goose, and an hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slop. Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slop into the trough. Then he pulled the goose board from the fence, and so there was a whole wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider, cried the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence into the yard. He walked to the trough and took a long drink of sloth, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the pop over. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur fetched a hammer and some 8-penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. He's quite a pig. Yes, he'll make a good pig. And Mr. Zuckerman, Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt the warmth of milk inside his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. I'm really too young to go into the world alone, he thought as he lay down. Okay, you guys. So, do you guys want me to continue reading this next month?
Yeah.
Is a chapter book?
Yes, it is.
No.
Oh.
Yes.
And sorry that I came on late.
Oh, it's okay.
It's gonna go you blind.